Many of the smaller Bitcoin miners have been getting into the high performance computing or HPC space recently. It's been booming with demand and data center providers haven't been able to keep up. But until now, I've struggled to find a really solid data point to make a decision about if it's worth it or not for the Bitcoin miners. But we now finally have some good data points that we can use to compare. So in this video, I'm just going to break down some quick back of the napkin maths we can use to compare. And I'll also give you some lookup tables that you can use so you can compare between Bitcoin price, network exahash, and the HPC value per megawatt. So the data comes from Core Scientific's press release, which came out on the 3rd of June. And in that press release, they signed a $3.5 billion US contract, which is 12 years long with CoreWeave. And as part of that contract, they're going to give over 200 megawatts of their facilities to be used for high performance computing services. Now, without sort of digging really deep into the contract, there's just a few numbers that we need to pull out so that we can get a rough estimate of the value of the HPC contract. The key numbers really are the 200 megawatts of electricity capacity. And for that 200 megawatts of electricity capacity, that will give an annualized revenue to Core Scientific of around $292 million per year. The cost for the conversion is going to be footed by CoreWeave, and the conversion costs around $300 million upfront, and that will be incrementally taken from the value of the contract. So based on that data, it means we can pull together rough and ready values for 1 megawatt of HPC computing against 1 megawatt for Bitcoin mining. I'll be excluding the conversion costs from these costs because that's going to depend on the data center capacity itself, how it's been built, and if any rebuild or modifications are required. So for example, Iron, which is partial Bitcoin miner, partial HPC provider, have very energy dense facilities in terms of their rack density. And that's way above what's required for Bitcoin mining, but it means that their data centers are more suitable for HPC, which requires that higher density per rack than Bitcoin mining does in a data center. So just breaking it down, the value of 1 megawatt for 1 year at Core Scientific is simply the $291 million of revenue divided by 200 megawatts. So that gives a yearly value per megawatt of 1.46 million. So that's a really nice, simple baseline that we can use to compare against the Bitcoin mining. So the Bitcoin mining is slightly more complex because there's quite a few more variables at play here. There's the network hash rate, Bitcoin rewards per block, and the miner efficiency are really the three key metrics that are going to drive the value per megawatt. I've assumed that electricity costs are going to be neutral in both instances. So I've assumed 100% uptime, and therefore it's just the same energy cost on Bitcoin mining as it is if you're using it for high performance compute. So the Bitcoin network has a 30-day rolling average hash rate of pretty much dead on 600 exahash per second at the time of recording. So I'm going to use that as a baseline assumption. Block rewards have also been averaging about 3.4 Bitcoin per block since the halving. So that's the base fee plus transaction fees that miners receive. And finally, the miner efficiency varies a lot depending on the specific miner you're looking at. So you need to look at the specific miner's data. But I mean, they're typically anywhere from 20 to 35 joules per terahash for most miners. So just for this initial calculation, the lookup tables that I'll provide later in the video go through different miner efficiencies, so you can just mix and match to whatever miner you're looking at. But if we assume for this a miner efficiency of 23.05 joules per terahash, so that's what CleanSpark stated as their efficiency in their May 2024 update. So that would mean that the average megawatt should produce around 0.043 exahash per second of mining capacity. So that's equivalent to approximately 1/14,000th of the Bitcoin network. So we can therefore look at our expected Bitcoin per block, which is 0.00024 Bitcoin, so not that much. But since we know that a block is produced every 10 minutes, then there'll be 52,560 blocks in a year. So that means 1 megawatt is equivalent to approximately 12.81 Bitcoin being produced per year. So if we assume a price of say 70k, then we can value 1 megawatt at about $896,000 per year. Now that's significantly below the 1.46 million that Core Scientific are getting for their energy with an HPC contract. And just in case you're interested, it gives a break-even point, all else being equal, of around $113,000 per Bitcoin. Now, obviously, there's loads of variables at play here, but this is what the lookup tables that you roughly end up with based on that data come up with. So you can pause and screenshot them if you want, but it tells you the value of 1 megawatt for Bitcoin mining, which you can compare against approximate HPC values of 1.46 million per megawatt. So I've given the tables based on three baseline network exahash values. So the top one is for a 600 exahash network, which is broadly where we are at the moment. The middle one is a 650, so just shy of a 10% increase of where we are. and the bottom one is a 700 exahash network, which we may or may not see later this year. You can then pick off your miner efficiency down the left-hand side. So I've tabulated it from 15 to 35. So that should hopefully incorporate most miners plus any upgrades that the miners have got coming this year with more efficient machines. And then across the top, I put in some Bitcoin price points so you can see what the value would be if the miners sold the Bitcoin immediately after mining and converted that into dollars. So from a high level point of view, that makes HPC look much more profitable at the moment than Bitcoin mining with the power available. And so therefore it's more efficient to use it for HPC mining than it is for Bitcoin mining. But that isn't to say it's a straight up, oh yeah, HPC is better than Bitcoin mining. And that's really to do with the terms of the contracts. So for example, the Core Scientific contract that they signed is 12 years long. So that's quite a long time to be tied into a specific price point, especially if, say, their electricity prices increase or the Bitcoin price increases. So for example, if the Bitcoin price were to skyrocket to 200k, then Core Scientific are trading a certain 1.46 million per megawatt, but missing out on potentially 3.5 million maybe per megawatt. And that also doesn't include any effects of them possibly keeping hold of the Bitcoin on their balance sheet and having any price appreciation that's linked with that underlying Bitcoin. So my general takeaway has been that HPC is generally, in my opinion, beneficial for the miners. I think it's really good for the Bitcoin miners because it will give them a baseline of solid recurring revenue, which they don't get with Bitcoin. Because the underlying commodity price of Bitcoin is fluctuating all the time, they don't necessarily know what their revenues are going to be. It's quite a sort of speculative business model from that point of view. Whereas a sort of data center HPC type business model is much more certain, and these contracts are tied in. And depending on the specifics of the contract, unfortunately, most of the miners don't divulge that information. There may be ongoing maintenance costs associated with that the miners might not have the in-house speciality for, so they may need to hire in extra people for that. There's all kinds of marginal risks available with each option. One thing it really does do, though, is put into perspective how valuable large-scale energy sites are. So, for example, Riot Platform have a potential 1 gigawatt facility at Corsicana in Texas. And if all of that was HPC Compute, based on the same numbers that Core Scientific are getting, that site alone would bring in about $1.46 billion per annum. So if that's running at 4 cents a kilowatt hour, it'd have running costs of around $350 million per annum. And then maybe if we just assume personnel costs, maintenance costs, maybe around 100 million, which feels quite generous, then the site would still be clearing $1 billion gross in profit per year. And so that's a pretty healthy number and just really shows how much those big sites could potentially be worth. Now, if this is the kind of analysis that you like, then you can join my weekly newsletter, which I'll leave some links to in the description below, where it includes lots of data similar to this. It looks at a wide variety of topics, not just Bitcoin miners. It looks at personal finance, the investing space in general. And you can also follow me on my journey to building a £1 million investment portfolio. As well as the newsletter, you can also hit the subscribe button below, and then you can get notifications when I release new videos, which will have interesting data points like this, and they'll cover investing, personal finance, and a really wide variety of topics. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.